Guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to talk about all the books that I read in October. I had a really great reading month in October, including an entire week that I read zombie books, which I did do a vlog about, so if you haven't seen that yet I will link that up above. I will briefly talk about the books that I read during that week, but I won't go into too much detail about them as I did talk about them at length in that video. So I will start off with the first book I read in October, or finished in October I should say, and that is A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J Maas. This is the third book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and I have to say this is a series that I have thoroughly enjoyed because we are following a character who lives in a world where humans coincide, live alongside fairies, though there is a barrier between their lands and there's a lot of animosity between the races. And we follow a character who ends up, it's kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling, she ends up being taken into the house of this one High Lord of the fairies. And she ends up falling in love with him, even though he is quite beastly in a lot of ways, and she does end up having to almost fight for her own life but also fight for his life while proving her love to him by the end of the book. In this book, Court of Wings and Ruin, we're still following Feyre as she continues on with her journey, and obviously I don't want to say too much for spoilers, and we're kind of coming up to a really big battle, really big war that has been kind of on the horizon for a lot of the last couple of books. Now I will say I do think this book, there was parts of it where I felt probably not as intrigued or as interested as I did in the other two books. I did think there were parts of it that maybe could have been a little bit faster paced, or there might not have been as focused on, I kind of wanted to get back to the battles and not so much of the talking, and there is a lot of romantic scenes and sex scenes in these books. That's what they're kind of known for as well, where with this one I think we got a lot of it in the second book. I don't think we needed as much of it in the third book because it kind of been there, done that. We know that that's what they're doing now. I kind of wanted more about what was actually going on in the world. I will say there were, as I said, there were high risks and high stakes in this book, but also a lot of our characters who are clearly favourite characters both of the readers and of the author. Things happen to them in this book and in the previous book where it's almost like they come really close to dying and they don't, and when that happens a few times to the characters you start kind of thinking that maybe nothing will ever happen to them. Now I'm not saying I want these characters to die because I actually really like them myself, and I would be really sad if they were ever killed off, but when things happen where we're almost there and but not quite there, or the characters that do die are very minor characters, I feel things, not that they get a bit boring, but you don't, maybe I'm not as I'm kind of thinking that oh, she'll never hurt these characters more than she has to, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I wonder how that will continue on with the rest of the series, but yeah, it definitely felt like she was playing with making us worry where nothing was really bad was going to happen. So I gave this one a 4 and a 5 stars overall. Did really enjoy it, but definitely probably my least favourite of the 3 so far. And then I read a book called Hollow Kingdom by Kira Jane Buxton. This is a really unusual book. This is a book set during a zombie apocalypse, except instead of following human characters, we're actually following a character who is a crow, and his name is ST, which is actually short for shit turd because that's apparently what his owner called him, and we are following him alongside his dog brother Dennis as ST kind of tries to figure out what has happened to all the humans, or the mofos as he calls them. What has happened to all of the mofos in the world and why they're acting crazy and why they're trying to attack their animal companions. And ST has a little bit of an identity complex as well, identity problem, because he actually believes himself truly to be a human and that he is trapped in this crow form, and that his true form should be a human being. And we see him kind of struggle with that and kind of almost make peace with his crowness during this book, as he finally has to communicate with other crows and kind of live with other crows and then depend on them for survival and for friendship and things like that. And there's a lot of really heartwarming moments in this book. It's kind of batshit crazy, but there's loads of really lovely heartwarming moments between the animals and animals helping each other. And there was an animal funeral in this book. Obviously we're talking about zombie apocalypse with animal characters, so there is going to be animal death in this book, unfortunately, and there was an animal funeral in this book that really got me emotional. It definitely brought tears a lump in my throat, and there were some other emotional bits when you get into the mind of a dog who's waiting for her owner to come back, and her owner's never going to come back, and she's waiting and eventually she has no weight left in her, and It's just so sad. But yeah, this was interesting. I do think it went a little bit too weird near like in parts of it, and I did lose my way like halfway through the book. My interest, like I kind of lost interest a little bit in the story, and it seemed to be going in just like really weird directions that like I wasn't really there for and I didn't really believe. I do think the apocalypse had some really interesting things, and there was kind of a really interesting gaze upon like how human beings, like how we act like today and our dependence on things like technology, and I thought that was really interesting how it was explored in this book. But I also think that the zombie apocalypse, like how it happened, like we got a little bit of an explanation, but it still didn't make enough sense for me. And yeah, so overall I gave this like a three stars. It would be like on a lower scale of a 3. I did really enjoy like the difference in the story and like you know, the slight twist that we weren't following any human characters. That was definitely a fun aspect of the story, but overall I didn't love the story itself. After that I finally read my first Grady Hendrix book, and that was the Final Girl support group, which I received from NetGalley. And this is like a thriller book, and I will say it is, I think, a thriller book with it's supposed to have a lot of satire in it. And I will say it was only kind of afterwards and seeing some other people's reviews of the book that I realised it was supposed to be as satirical as it was. And I think I took it a little bit too seriously when I was first reading it, and maybe if I had gone into it knowing more or like being more accepting of the satirical elements of this book, I might have enjoyed it a little bit more. Now I still did enjoy this book, and I really love the fact that we are following a group of final girls, these girls who not only have they had like one kind of slasher movie moment, but we're actually following girls who have had sequels, who have had people come after them again and have had more people die because of them again, and girls who are now women, like they're grown women, they are like in their 30s and 40s. You're following I think it's Lynette, her name is. I keep forgetting what her name is, but it's Lynette. Where she is always ready for someone to come after her again. She can't live a normal life. She can't relax in her life. She can't enjoy things because she's always ready to run, and she always has like escape options planned out with anything that she does. And we're following her as one final girl in their group dies and is killed by someone, and Lynette starts thinking that someone is after all of them, and there could be someone linked to every single one of them that they know that is actually the perpetrator, that is the person who is coming after them and is trying to kill them. So this kind of, what I didn't like about this is I felt like it went from like A to B, and then it went from like B to Z really quickly. Like I feel like there was just lots of like chopping and changing, and I felt like the story was moving around in a lot of different directions, and I felt like I felt a little bit lost with it, and I wasn't sure where exactly the author was trying to take us. I did really love the last part of this book. Great scenes at the end of this book to do with that kind of like slasher movie like trope, and I did really enjoy that. But I did think that middle of the book just felt really messy for me, and I wasn't never really sure exactly what I was supposed to be thinking with the book. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, and I will definitely be reading more Grady Hendrix in the future, and I did enjoy this one. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I was going to. I read my week of zombie books. So the first book I read was Broken World by Kate L. Murry. This is a book that is very much based on like the Walking Dead type of zombie apocalypse. It's pretty much Walking Dead fan fiction. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, and like if you want like a straightforward zombie apocalypse book, this is definitely the one to go for. The next book I read was Killing the Dead by Richard Murry. This is a book where it is actually set in the UK, so not in the US, so that was a nice change as well. This one is zombie apocalypse set in the UK, and we are following a character who is actually a serial killer. So we are following a serial killer during a zombie apocalypse. It's also a novella. It's only about like 100 pages, so it's also a really short read. So if you wanted a short zombie read, this one is enjoyable, and yeah, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars and I enjoyed it. And then I read a more military based zombie fiction. That was Arisen, which is book 1 of Fortress Britain. This is one that I had seen kind of talked about in other like reviews that I'd read from other zombie books, and this is one that people were saying like was quite good. And like I think this is one that's really for like a particular type of reader. This is, as I said, very military based, very military vernacular heavy. As the story gets going, it ends just getting to like an interesting bit in the book, and then it ends, and I just felt like that was really disappointing. So I didn't get what I wanted out of the book at all, and I just ultimately felt really disappointed in the book. So I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. And then I read Dontners of the Dead by Karina, Halle, and this was probably the most unique zombie book that I read during that week, and this is a historical fiction zombie book set during not the gold rush, but a pioneer pioneer story. So it's more of a pioneer romance with a zombie edge, because you're following a girl who ends up going up the mountain employed as a tracker with this group of men, and she ends up kind of falling for this one guy in this group, but they end up kind of being targeted by almost these like White Walker like zombies while they're like up the mountain, and they end up having to kind of like depend on each other for survival, and ultimately it ends up being the two of them against a bunch of these like zombie monsters in this like mountainous, like snowy mountainous forest. And yeah, quite exciting. Sweeter than I thought it was going to be, like more romance than zombie fiction, but I think it's like a nice place to start if you wanted it like kind of to foray into like the monster zombie fiction area, while it not being like too scary. And there's more of like a horror element to this book than there was in the other books as well. So yeah, I quite enjoyed this one as well, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I went with something a little bit lighter, and I read Poppy's Recipe for Life by Heidi Swain. This was the October pick for the Cozy Blanket Book Club, which I'm on, which is on Books and Bargains, or Charlotte Lucy Love's Patreon. And this is, as I said, very, very cozy book. This is the second book in the Nightingale Square series or trilogy, but you don't have to really read the first book to be able to read this one. I think they can all be read as standalones. They're just set in the same town, so you see the same characters come in and out of them. And this one we're following Poppy, who moves into Nightingale Square, and then her life kind of ends up taking a turn as well when she ends up bringing in her brother, her teenage brother, to come and live with her. And she ends up having to kind of reconnect with her brother, and they've had a bit of a weird upbringing. Their mother isn't like the nicest person in the world, and she ends up having to reconnect with her brother while also getting to know her new neighbour next door, and they have kind of like romantic like feelings between each other, and they're trying to figure that out. And yeah, just kind of getting on with life, getting to know all our neighbours, helping out with the garden in Nightingale Square, which is kind of like this whole thing. I think that kind of carries through the whole the trilogy. This one was really cute. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I definitely enjoyed it a lot more than the first book in this series, which was Sunshine and Sweet Peas in Nightingale Square. I liked Poppy a lot more as a character. I think she's just a really bubbly, lovely character to follow. I really liked her group of friends. There's a really cute pug in this book that I really liked. And yeah, I just really loved, I always say this, but I always love older sister, younger brother relationships in books, because I am an older sister with a younger brother. I will say there's not a lot of like drama in these books, like the conflict. There's never really a lot of conflict. There's a lot of like small things that like repeat themselves constantly throughout the book, rather than there being this one big conflict. And I actually would kind of rather the one big conflict than a lot of little conflicts, because the little conflicts get a little bit tiresome and the book gets a little bit boring, and there's not like a lot of exciting things that happen in the book. It just kind of plods along, which is kind of, it's fine. And sometimes that's exactly the type of book you want. You just want a cozy book that is not going to shock or like frighten you or make you angry or like ill in any way. It's kind of a very neutral book. So yeah, 3.5 out of 5 stars, like much better than the first book, and I'm glad I read it. Then I picked up Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This is actually a book that was gifted to me last year by Victoria over what Victoria read, and I'm really glad I was able to save it for this spooky season and pick it up, because I actually ended up being so pleasantly surprised by this book. I really, really enjoyed it. In this book, we were following a character called Jules, who's completely down on her luck. She basically lost her apartment and her boyfriend all in one day. She's been couch surfing at her friends, but she needs to kind of get back on track. She ends up jumping at the chance to be an apartment sitter when she finds this job in this really prestigious building in New York called the Bartholomew. There's some real weird rules attached to this job where, like, you know, she can never have any friends. She's going to be there for 3 months. She can never have any visitors or friends over, and she can never leave the apartment at nighttime. She always has to be in the apartment at nighttime. But she's been given a lot of money to do this job, so she decides to do it. And as she like settles in and she gets to know some of the other apartment sitters in the building, and then one day one of the apartment sitters disappears, and she just feels like there's something weird going on, and she starts to look into it, and more weird things start coming out about this building and kind of its dark history. So this one like was just really enjoyable for me. I just really loved going along with Jules and trying to figure out what like was going on. I definitely did not guess what was going on in this building at all. So the end of this book was like quite exciting, and yeah, this was just, yeah, I just really enjoyed this one. I would definitely, it's actually like referenced in this book, but if you like American Horror Story Hotel, like definitely pick this book up because it has a lot of like similar kind of creepy vibes, old building, like a lot of dark secrets and history and things like in the corridors, and you never really know what you're going to get with it. And yeah, so 4 out of 5 stars and really enjoyed this. After that, I actually I finished a buddy read that I was doing in October with Kirsty over Kirsty's Reviews. This was The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, and this one was one that ended up really surprising me as well. I actually did not expect to enjoy this one so much. This ended up being like a 4.5 5-star read for me, and I think it's more of a 4.5 than a 5, but I did just really enjoy this one. This one we're following a girl called Emmanuel who lives in the town of Bethel. This is kind of almost a very puritanical town. They follow a religion where they worship the father, and they kind of warn people against someone called the Mother, the Dark Mother. And the women in this town, they have very little rights, and they just kind of have to grow up, be very, very modest. They have to follow a lot of rules, and then they grow up, they get married, they get marked when they get married, like they get branded on their faces when they kind of belong to the men that they get married to. And they're all kind of ruled by this one person called a prophet who gets the word of the father, who was like the father's vessel in this town. And he himself, not a very nice figure, he's very corrupted man. So we're following Emmanuel as she's living in this town, and then she is drawn into this place called the Dark Woods, which is where like the mother and her witches are supposed to worship, and that's where they're supposed to dwell. And then plagues start coming to Bethel, and Emmanuel thinks the plagues are somehow linked to her and also to her mother, who has her own history within Bethel. And Emmanuel's birth, like conception and birth, are all tied into these plagues that are now happening, and Emmanuel has to try and figure out what to do, how she might be able to save the town, but also like how to save herself, because she could end up being, you know, accused of being a witch, and like she could be sentenced to death, she could be burnt. Really dark vibes, and I just really enjoyed the horror elements in this book, like literally like raining blood, like fields soaked in blood, and like darkness and blight, and men and women like being like, you know, mad with fever and running into the dark woods. Like all these kind of real horroristic elements in this book just really worked for me in a really great way, and I just really enjoyed reading this. I do think this one has a sequel coming out, and I actually don't think it needs a sequel. I think it reads really well as a standalone. I think you can completely treat this as a standalone. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars and really enjoyed it. Then the next book I read was an audiobook. That was The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Unfortunately, this one didn't work for me. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, and I just didn't enjoy this one. This just ended up being a little bit different to what I'd always thought it was about. We're following a little girl called Wen, who is on like a cabin holiday with her 2 dads. She's playing in the front of the cabin, and then this man comes out of the woods and basically tells her that what is going to happen next, what's going to happen inside the cabin, is not her fault, and she's not to be scared, and that her and her family are going to end up saving the world. And what happens next was just mad. Like it was just a little bit mad. I didn't really enjoy where the story went. I didn't really like, I don't really know why I didn't like this book. I just didn't really like it. It just didn't gel with me. I just felt very disinterested in the story and where it went. I've been told, like, you know, this was a really violent book, it was really scary, and I actually feel like I've read scarier and more violent books, with like, you know, like Karen Slaughter books. I feel like maybe I was like underwhelmed by the violence in this book or something, but I definitely have read books with more violence and more gore and more terrifying subject matters. I will say the audiobook of this book was really bad. The narrator was terrible, so I don't recommend the audiobook. She was just really monotone, and yeah, I just can't understand why anyone would ever ask her to narrate a book, because I think she was really bad. The last book I managed to finish in October was The Manningtree Witches by A.K. Blakemore. This is a book I read for Lauren in the Books Patreon book club, and this is also one I had on NetGalley. And this one again ended up being a little bit of disappointment. This was a 2-star read as well, and this is actually set in 1644, so it's historical fiction. It's set in 1644 Manningtree in England. We're following a girl called Rebecca West who lives in Manningtree, and we see her and her mother being accused of being witches by Matthew Hopkins, who was a famous witch finder, and his methods in the 1640s actually inspired the witch finding methods in Salem then in the 1690s. But this one, there's very kind of, I don't know how you could say it, old-fashioned language. Everyone speaks quite like not the way we speak today, I should say. Now, it didn't get me too much, but it did mean that it took a little bit longer for me to get into the book, to connect with the characters. I didn't really feel connected to the characters at all. I do think the atmosphere in this book around like how people lived, like people were real dirty and grimy, and I think the atmosphere of that type of setting was done really, really well in this book. Like it's the type of book that makes you feel a bit dirty and like you want to shower, like it's just a bit gross in a lot of different ways, and I did like that. And I also really like the emphasis this book showed on how the fact that the people, mostly the women who were targeted by these witch trials, were most of the time women who were already ostracized by society. They were women who were ostracized by society in different ways. They were women who were poor, they were women who were old, they were widows who were alone. I really like that this book kind of showed that as well. I do think if you don't know much about witch trials and what they used to do to women, and like basically how farcical they were, and if you were accused, you never really had any hope in hell of being innocent, or being judged innocent. You were always damned from the moment someone pointed a finger at you. I do think this would be really, really shocking. Now, I've read a few books about witch trials, one of them about witch trials in I think the 1620 maybe, and which was Daughters of Witching Hill, which a little bit similar to this book. If I was to recommend a book about witch trials, I probably wouldn't recommend this one. I'd recommend some other ones that I've read. So yeah, this one just didn't really do it for me in the end. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars and was a little bit disappointed in it. So that is everything I read in October. Please let me know what you guys think. If you guys have read any of these books, what spooky books you read in October. If you could recommend me any book that you read in October, what would it be? And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!